Several years ago, I was strolling through a bookstore, and it caught my eye that God made the cover of Life magazine. I don't think it was a big deal to him, but it got my attention. In fact, because he invented the concept, it was about time. But the title of this magazine asks the question, when you think of God, what do you see? Pretty important question in light of the fact that how we answer that question will define how we answer who we are, the world around us and how we understand it, our place in the world around us. Very important question, and it might seem pretty straightforward, but there are a lot of factors that influence how we answer that question. In fact, they say that our upbringing, our relationship with our parents, and in particular our relationship with our fathers, has a significant influence on how we would answer the question and how we would perceive God in adulthood. Life circumstances can influence how we answer that question, or maybe our religious tradition growing up. I love what Garrison Keillor says, who tells the stories of Lake Wobegon, and he talks about Lake Wobegon being a town that is so intensely Lutheran that even the atheists in town, it's a particularly Lutheran God they don't believe in. So our religious tradition will influence it. We can answer that question different ways in different seasons of our life as well. I went to a small Christian college in Southern California, and we had a fellow student there who I'll call Joyce. And Joyce was one of these really intense Christians. You know, the type that are very, very serious about God, about their faith, about their rules. And she took herself very seriously and wanted us to be taken very seriously. In fact, she would be called by some a fanatic. And you know the definition of a fanatic is someone who can't change their mind and won't change the subject. And that was Joyce. But several years after graduation, it was interesting because we had an occasion to connect with Joyce over a dinner, and not knowing a lot of what had happened in the years in between college and then, we just struck up a conversation. And I said, Joyce, now tell me, where are you going to church these days? And she kind of looked down and she said, well, I haven't really found a church that I agree with and that I'm comfortable with. And so apparently she wasn't going to church at all. And being the sensitive pastoral type, I said, you're telling me that in the entire Los Angeles Valley, you can't find a single church you agree with? Which didn't help the conversation at all. Because it turns out she had gone through quite a bit and had changed her perspective on God dramatically. Not knowing that, I said, Joyce, we need a place to worship. And when I said the word worship, it was like daggers came out of her eyes, and she said, that's one of the things that bothers me. Worship. What is it about God that he demands our worship? Is he that insecure that he needs his ego stroked? Or is he just arrogant? I knew something had changed in how Joyce would answer the question, who is God? But I also thought she kind of makes a good point. In fact, reading Exodus chapter 20, where God is giving his 10 commandments to Moses, and he sets it up with these words, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol. Why? For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Jealous? What is the God of the universe doing with what we would call a petty emotion like jealousy? That sounds more like a clingy lover or maybe an arrogant boss who wants all the credit. I had a professor in that same college. In fact, when I went in as a freshman, he had a reputation. He was a professor, as a member of the faculty, as well as a member of the administration, had a lot of influence in this college, and had a pretty well-run and successful program. I didn't know him, but I enrolled in his classes, and not knowing him personally, I only knew him in his position as a member of the faculty. All I could pick up and how to relate to him was from the whisperings and the rumors of other students around me on the campus. And some would describe him, in fact, often it was those who didn't do so well in his program, but some would describe him as very demanding, very harsh, somewhat distant, perhaps arrogant. Not knowing any better, that's how I related to him. I was pretty intimidated. But a few months into the semester, I had the opportunity with some other students, because of a program I was involved in, to be at his home and spend some time at his house. And I got to watch him in his relationship with his wife and playing with his small children and serving starving college students chocolate chip cookies. And I got to know him as a person, and it really dramatically changed how I related to him in his position. Otherwise, I simply would have believed the whisperings and the rumors. Today, I've invited one to speak to us who has been actually whispering and spreading rumors in the ears of mankind since the beginning of time. His name is Lucifer. Once upon a time, he was the highest of archangels in the heavenly kingdom. According to official reports, he led a rebellion. He tells it differently. So I've asked Lucifer to come to share with us today how he would answer the question, who is God?
I am God. I have never doubted that for a moment. My ability to remain unshakably aware of me is now universally accepted as proof of my divinity. The tyrant, the one you call God, is the cosmic bully. He and his spoiled princeling desire to impose their will on all that is. What an irony. The tyrant wants to be God over all. I do not. The tyrant is jealous and selfish as well as tyrannical. I, on the other hand, am generous and liberal. I do not want him to jump at my beck and call, and yet he wants me and every creature in the universe to obey his every whim. His lust for power disgusts me. I do not want others to do my will. No, I want them to do their own. And yet, the tyrant is obsessed with convicting men and angels that he alone is God. Now, I'm not offended that the tyrant calls himself God. By all means, let him be a god. For that matter, I am willing that everything breathing be a god. Let us all be gods. You see, the contrast is stark and terrible. I want each being to have his own universe and to be its God. He wants one universe with himself as God. That is the great cosmic struggle. Now, you may have heard that I wanted to be God and hence the war. Oh, stuff and nonsense. The Creator knew and knows to this day that I am God. It was not my desire to have him bow to me that caused what we call the war. No, it was my heroic refusal to bow to him. I am the cosmic liberator. I am the mind behind the mind of every true struggle for freedom from domination. Had it not been for me, Adam would never have known his destiny as a god. Well, there it is, in a nutshell. The tyrant wanted a tidy little heaven with himself as the center of unbroken praise. When I liberated a goodly portion of the angels with self-actualizing revolt, he accused me of wanting to be Lord over the angels. Of course, nothing of the sort was true. I simply wanted them to understand who they really were. A knowledge, let me hasten to add, that the tyrant wished to deny them.
Many of you may be like me. You grew up in a church context and reading the scriptures, and particularly the Old Testament. And it seems that when we read the Old Testament, and the Old Testament prophets in particular, we get a sense of a God who is perhaps, well, very condemning. Perhaps he comes off as angry. And yet if we read a little bit deeper, in fact, today I want to look at two passages in the book of Jeremiah and then later Hosea. Two passages from the Old Testament prophets that in the midst of us experiencing God in his position as judge, in his position of needing to condemn the rebellion of his people, we catch glimpses of God the person. Jeremiah chapter 2, I will read excerpts. I remember the devotion of your youth, he says to his people. How as a bride you loved me and followed me through the desert, through a land not sown. Israel was holy to the Lord. Do you sense the tone of affection? Do you sense a husband saying to his bride, do you remember when we were dating? Do you remember the honeymoon? How great it was? But something's happened. Chapter 3, you have lived as a prostitute with many lovers. Would you now return to me, declares the Lord? Is there any place where you have not been ravished? By the roadside you sat waiting for lovers, like a nomad in the desert. You have defiled the land with your prostitution and wickedness. You have the brazen look of a prostitute, refusing to blush with shame. It's been said that to read the Old Testament prophets is a lot like overhearing an argument between lovers in the next room. The intensity and the emotion. More than an argument between lovers, in this passage we find that this is a husband who has discovered his wife being unfaithful. In a crowd of this size, there are people here today who have experienced a spouse who's been unfaithful. And you know exactly the feeling of betrayal, of embarrassment, and yes, of anger when that occurs. In fact, if I was to find that my wife was being unfaithful with another man, I would be unjust and unloving not to be angry. And yet, he goes on, return, faithless Israel, declares the Lord. I will frown on you no longer, for I am merciful. I will not be angry forever, only acknowledge your guilt. Now, he doesn't say acknowledge your guilt like the neighborhood bully who's stronger, so he's pinning us down saying, say uncle. He says it as a husband. In fact, he goes on, return, faithless people, declares the Lord, for I am your husband, and I will choose you. So we get to know God the person. First thing we discover is that God the person is a forgiving husband of an unfaithful bride. And we are that unfaithful bride. Later in the book of Hosea, another Old Testament prophet, we catch a different picture. Hosea chapter 11, when Israel was a child, he says, I loved him. And out of Egypt I called my son. But the more I called Israel, the further they went from me. They sacrificed to Baals, which are idols, and they burned incense to images. It was I who taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by the arms. Do you pick up the tenderness of a father remembering his little baby and holding those tiny fingertips and as the baby toddled and took first steps? And he's remembering those days in the early relationship with his people. And yet now he has a rebellious child. And again, if you have experienced the heartache of a child who's rebelled, you know the sense of helplessness, you know the sense of second guessing, and you know, yes, the anger that you feel. And yet, he goes on, I will not carry out my fierce anger, for I am God and not man, the Holy One among you. I will not come in wrath. God, the person, is a patient father of a rebellious child. So he fills a position, but he also is a person in relationship with a bride who's been unfaithful and a child who has rebelled, giving context to what we might otherwise perceive to be a harsh, distant position. I've asked another to join us today to give a different perspective. His name is Michael, also an archangel, but he did not join the rebellion. And he comes today to answer the question from his perspective, who is God?
Lucifer calls God's authority tyranny. Truth be told, he'd like to throw off that authority. He'd like to rule in heaven, which of course is insane. He's doomed the moment he even thinks about sitting on God's throne. Lucifer's strength, in fact the strength of all the angels, fails when put up against God's most single whispered word. How can a created being replace his creator? How can Lucifer and those he persuaded hope to gather the strength to overthrow God, to become gods? It's as impossible for an angel to become God as it is for a homemade pot to become its artist. The answer, of course, is pride. Pride is exaggerated self-importance. Pride always denies that it was created, and so it must become more aggressive, more violent. The Creator must be rubbed out, stamped out, taken away from history. In short, God must be killed. It's pride that has fueled Satan's desires from the Garden of Eden all through human history. He has sought pride in eradicating God.
Michael, you always avoid talking about the tyrant's pride.
You accuse God of pride.
Absolutely. Monstrous pride. Has there ever been such a self-absorbed, demanding ego? I mean, everything must praise him. Those of us who would not constantly bathe his ego in worship were exiled. Only those of you who would bow and scrape could stay. Michael, don't you ever chafe? Don't you ever think all that you're perfect, you're holy, you're lovely, it's just a little bit excessive? I mean, think of it. Come on, Michael, please. I can still see all of you huddled around his throne. All the singing, the shouting, the worshiping. Really, let's talk about his pride.
Is a rabbit proud to be a rabbit?
I doubt it.
Is an angel proud to consider himself an angel?
Obviously not. He's just an angel.
And God is just God. This is reality, not pride. Now, if a mouse decides that he's going to be a lion, he leaves reality and joins pride. He may feel proud, but he's deluded. In the same way, an angel, even an archangel, who considers himself to be God, has left reality and entered into madness.
You create a clever argument, Michael.
I only speak irrevocable truth. The Lord, he is God. It is he who has made us and not we ourselves. We certainly didn't make him. And not to worship him is insane.
But why must there be only one God?
Well, it's not a case of must. It's a case of what is. There are billions of rabbits who are quite happy to be rabbits. There are billions of people and legions of angels, and as long as they stay people and angels, everything is fine. But the moment they decide to be God, then pride eats away at their inside, and the pain creates rebellion. There is one truth. There is one God. There is one Lucifer, an angel.
No. I am a God with the pride to defy tyranny. Without pride, I would still be as you are.
Without pride, you are still as I am.
I am a new creature. I was a puppet angel, and now I am a god. From subservient angel to self-made god. Pride stirred me to rise up and to go from his tyrant kingdom.
Oh, Lucifer, Lucifer, you're speaking the truth. Don't you hear your own words? It was indeed pride that drove you out of heaven. Jesus teaches his disciples to pray the opposite of pride. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. This prayer acknowledges that God is God, and those who seek him find his kingdom.
Why? Oh, his kingdom, his will. Michael, can't you think for yourself? You bovine creatures nauseate me. Why must it be his kingdom? Why his will? Michael, don't you want your kingdom?
To seek your own kingdom is to search for what cannot be.
Far better to strive than to submit, I say. Even if it is as you say, that's just my point. You see, if only the tyrant can will or rule or have or even claim a kingdom, then all others are nothing more than his servants.
There you go, speaking truth again. Can't avoid it, can you? Yes, the king's servant submits to his will. He hears his voice and obeys, and as such inherits the kingdom.
A slave in a kingdom is still a slave.
A slave who inherits a kingdom is free. An archangel in chains in the pit is a slave forever.
Oh, yes, yes. You always resort to threats.
To truth.
To superior smugness.
And a quiet confidence.
I am your equal.
That's right. We're both nothing.
Don't you want to be someone?
Oh, I am someone. I am what he made me.
You will never own anything.
Never.
You will never speak as a god, calling your will into reality.
Never.
You will never be a god.
Never.
Well, we settled that.
That was settled long ago for both of us.
You make me so mad, you know that? You burn me up.
Interesting choice of words.
Oh, shut up.
In our home, we do something we call family nights, which is the time that we, once a week, maybe every other week, set up object lesson type activities with our children in order to instill our faith and pass our beliefs to them in a way that's tangible and incarnational in the home. A number of years ago, when our oldest Kyle was 10 years old and Sean was about 8 and Troy was probably 3, and the baby Nicole was not born yet, Olivia and I set up a couple of family night activities that are important, I think, today to share. The first one was on the law of love. We brought our kids together and we did an activity and had our game, and we do a little dance when we do this that I won't show you here today. But once we pull together and we start our fun time, and so we did an activity tied to what was called the law of love. And we said the law of love, we're all going to create our own list of the law of love, how we're going to do unto others as we would have them do unto us, and how we're going to obey. So the kids would create their list, as you can imagine, with, well, I will obey mommy and daddy the first time, I will do my homework without being asked twice, I will do my chores, I will not hit my brother or sister, et cetera, et cetera. So they created their list, and we went into the week. And then the following week, we did another family night, and we did our dance and our theme song, and they came together, and I said, all right, tonight we're going to trial. And I'm the judge. I'm going to prepare. Mom is the bailiff. She's going to get you ready. And I went into the next room, and I sat behind my desk, and I put on a blanket over my shoulders as my judge's robe, and I had a little mallet from one of the kids' toys as my gavel. And Mom led in the accused, and I said, this is the case of Bruner versus Bruner, Bruner, and Bruner. And they took their seats. And I said, you have been accused of violating the law of love. How do you plead? Well, our oldest Kyle said, I plead not guilty. Right away. Interesting. Enter the plea of not guilty for Kyle. Sean, who's more fun-loving and gets in trouble a lot, said, well, I'm guilty. I don't know what I did, but I'm guilty. Enter the plea of guilty for Sean, and Troy was just happy to be along for the ride. So I proceeded to the next point of the trial. I said, now, not only is Mom the bailiff, she's also our chief witness. And so, Mom, I would like you to take the stand. At this point, Kyle's thinking serious about changing his plea. And she began to detail the ways that week they had violated their own list that they said they committed to keep for the law of love that week. So we ended up that portion with me taking my gavel, pounding it on the table and saying, you have been accused and now found guilty of violating the law of love. So as your judge, I declare your punishment to be a swat with a paddle until pain. Swat with a paddle? This is family night. It's supposed to be fun, Dad. What are you talking about? I said, did you do it? Well, yeah. You know you did it. You admit that what you did was wrong. Yes. So you admit you deserve the punishment. Well, yes. All right. Bend over. So the boys bent over, grabbed that chair, wondering what's going to happen. Olivia pulls out the paddle, and she raises it up. And just as she's about to pull it down, I stand up and says, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I'm your judge, and I threw off the robe. But I'm also your father, and I love you. I don't want you to go through this punishment. So I'm going to take it for you. And the boys got a look of horror on their face because they realized they don't want this punishment, but I don't deserve it either. And Olivia got a big old grin on her face. And I bent over and took my wallops. Then we went into the next room, and I simply asked the children, what just happened? And Sean, 8 years old, said, that's just like Jesus. Scriptures tell us in Romans chapter 5, verse 8, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. While we were still an unfaithful bride, while we were still a rebellious child, Christ died for us. And in the process, God in his position and God the person came together. Later that night, we were preparing for bed and thought we had the kids all tucked in, but I heard a little knock on the door, and Sean peers around the corner and says, Mommy, Daddy, I want to receive the gift of salvation. Would you, in a moment, we're going to receive communion together, but for a moment, would you pray with me for a second? Just bow your heads. I believe there are probably two kinds of people in this audience today. One, you may be like Sean. You think, what we've experienced today has opened my eyes to who God really is, the person of God behind the position. And I'd like to relate to him. I'd like to accept the gift that Sean talked about for myself. If you're in that situation, I'm going to give the words to a prayer here. Now, pray your own prayer however you wish, but something to this effect you may want to pray. God, I've known about you for years, but today I realize I need to acknowledge my guilt and to accept your invitation to be my forgiving husband, to be my loving father, instead of just my angry judge. I want to accept Jesus' gift of salvation. Look forward to growing closer to you in days to come. Different words, but something to that effect. You may want to pray right now. Say, God, I want to be in a relationship with you, the person. Or perhaps you're like me, and you may want to pray something like this. Father, I have to confess, yes, I'm a believer, but I was uncomfortably close to resonating with Lucifer's words. I continually fight the temptation to make myself the God of my universe. And today I feel the need to submit anew and to respond to what we've experienced through worship. Worshiping God, worshiping the God who is our husband, who is our Father, who is our Redeemer. Amen. And that's what we're going to do in a moment. In fact, I'd like to ask those who'll be serving communion to come forward, begin to distribute.